So everybody can send us their phones. I really appreciate that. We do have two of our advertising vendors here tonight. So we also did put name tags back there, so anybody that has a blue name tag is a member, red name tag is non-member. Any non-member that's here, you do get to come to 2 meetings for free. If you have any other questions about joining, please contact, get hold of me, Bobby, any of the other board members that are here. Brian's right here, or Linda, and Linda can help you get joined up. If you're curious or have more questions about what the benefits would be, myself, Linda, any of the other board members could help explain that as well. So our first vendor I'd like to introduce is Mike from Discount Grain. Mike, you can come up here quickly. Just so you guys do know, Mike's cards are on the back table, and our next vendor has a brochure back there also.
A lot of you guys know me. I've been with the Landlord Association for a long time now. It definitely has its benefits. But I offer a service that's actually bigger than just Genesee County. My company is Discount Drain Cleaning. We also do waterproofing, some plumbing repairs and whatnot. We do crawl spaces and just about anything to do with trying to get that house sold. Okay. Like Ed said, my cards are in the back. A lot of you I've been working with for probably 20 years or less. All right. Well, I'm not going to sing. I'm not going to dance.
So I've used Mike on several of my projects, primarily commercial, and he does do a good job of figuring out what that water comes from. But I've also bought flip houses. You bought it knowing that the water is pouring through the foundation, and you know it's just a few $1,000 solution when you use Mike to fix it. I've also have a building on Beecher Road that has had water issues for decades, I believe, and Mike was able to get that solved for me very inexpensively. When other people were thinking big drain systems and big problems, Mike came in there and put a 100-foot tile on one side of the building, 100-foot tile on the other. It goes in the storm sewer, and everything's taken care of. Then the city sewer backed up, and I had another problem. Now we have a backup on each side of the building where we just pump water out the side. So another very inexpensive solution to solve the problem. So if you got water issues, he's the guy got to use, and also fantastic for your backup sewers. We've also got Terry here today.
And piggyback on Mike, if you get some water, then you can call me for sure, bro. And I can clean it up. Terry Pickard, I've been a member of the company for almost 6-8 months, no few of you. A lot of people don't know Servco, in addition to doing water, fire mitigation, we also do biohazards, so mold, lead, remodeling, recon. We do a lot of projects where we get called in to do a board up, and we end up rebuilding the whole house or the whole business to commercial, so we can do from the moment you have an emergency to the day that we get you the keys back to your property, and it's better than it was before, or I think, or at least as good as it was before anyways. There's some information back there. I'm around if anybody has any questions, feel free. Information's always free. If you have a question on any kind of issue, if we can't figure it out, we can point you in the right direction and get everything taken care of. So thank you very much, and enjoy the evening.
They also need contractors if you don't really looking for work. I'm sure you guys are also all looking for contractors, so very common problem.
Very common.
Right. Bobby, if you want to have a conversation. You want to talk about this?
I just said something.
Yeah, we got Bobby, our executive director, with a couple of things.
Okay, the liaison report for the city of Flint. Naturally, they do not have a budget. Today is the last day. So if they do not come up with a budget today, they're gonna have a massive layoff, supposedly. Okay, everybody, the city council is playing chicken with the mayor. So, let's see what happens. The other thing is, you probably have heard that the mayor had $99 million to work with. He spent $2 million on blight. Okay, with the blight, they are also going to pay $2,000 for anybody that's caught dumping commercial tires or any kind of tires. So guess what? I'm a snitch. So let's see what else. We got the 50-50 program that works very well for the sidewalk. So you might be able, like, for example, you pay $100, they pay the rest. It's difficult. So if you have maybe the driveway or something that you want repaired, you might be able to work with the contractor and get a better deal. So think about it. So that's that, and let's see what else I got for you guys. The city will be closed on, it's a holiday for Juneteenth, which is, they're doing that on Friday. Juneteenth is the 19th, but the city will be closed on Friday. And that is it.
All right, on for the main event. We have our speaker, Mark Mustola, here from Value Check Home Inspections. I've used Mark on dozens of home inspections over the years, and so please help me welcome Mark.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for having us here. We give quite a few presentations. We give a lot of presentations to real estate offices and real estate boards, and over the last year, the vast majority of those have been via Zoom. So we like to be in person. It's really nice to be here in person. So I hope we can add some value to your evening. So really, what we're going to talk about today are these topics, right? These are some topics that were suggested by Jeremy and Aaron, talking a little bit about leaky basements, how to spot some common problems, and also maybe the differences between commercial versus residential inspections. So first, just to tell you a little bit about us, we're going to get a little commercial in up front. My wife Carrie is here, so we own Value Check Home Inspections. We've owned Value Check Home Inspections since 1993, so we're basically in our 28th year of business. We've got four full-time home inspectors, 2 full-time office staff. All of our inspectors are either ASHI or INTERNACHI certified, and we have done over 20,000 inspections since 1993. So we've seen a lot, and every time I think that I've seen everything, then I look into a house that just shocks the heck out of me. I'm like, oh, how could I have never seen that before? Also, just for your knowledge, we're fully insured. We have errors and emission insurance for inspection needs, but also general liability in case we're in a home and we break something, which is rare, but it can happen. So here's a list of our services, and it's pretty much what you would expect a home inspector to do. We do residential inspections, investor inspections, commercial inspections, well and septic testing, sewer scope, which we'll talk a little bit about that later. So we have 2 sewer scopes, and we do quite a bit of sewer scoping, and that could really benefit investors buying older properties or landlords or people are complaining about sewer drainage, but we can really get in there and see what's going on. Of course, we do radon testing, mold testing, wood destroying insect inspections if you need that for VA or FHA mortgages or any other purpose. Also, we do some expert litigation work, testifying in court, and then we like to think of ourselves as historic home specialists. I mean, if you look at areas like Benton, Holly, Flint, Flushing, so many of these places that have 100-plus-year-old buildings and homes, and we do those a lot. And they all have their unique problems, right? So you kind of have to know what you're looking at. I'm not going to go into these because of an interesting time, but with all of our home inspections, these are warranties and programs that just come with them. And if there was time and you wanted to talk about, we could have described them, but that's not really what we're here to talk So what we really want to start here, hopefully you can see some of these pictures. We wanted to talk about leaky foundations and leaky basements. Now this is really an excerpt. We have 12 classes that we have certified to give realtors CE credits for continuing education. So our class on foundations and leaky basements, that takes a minimum of an hour alone, right? So we only have, I think, maybe a half hour, a little bit more tonight, and we're going to try to touch on a lot of different topics, because I know everybody here might be interested in different things. So what I really wanted to talk about first on foundations is this is the biggest problem that you're going to run into, I think, in my opinion, is horizontal cracking, right? So in our class, we go into poured foundations that have a lot of common vertical shrinkage cracks, which really just aren't structural issues. You wouldn't worry about them. Sometimes they leak water. We get them epoxied shut and you move on, right? It's pretty common. But if a buyer or an investor is unfamiliar with that, they could look scary. You could have diagonal cracking, settlement step cracking. For the most part, unless they're really severe and you've got some displacement with that foundation, I wouldn't be quite as worried about that. But these horizontal cracks, this is the crack that is likely to cost you some money under many circumstances. So typically what's happening is the wall, you have a block wall. One side of the block wall, you have the dirt. The other side, you have the basement, right? So the dirt wants to fall into the basement just by gravity. It can't be straight up. So you have to design the foundation wall to withstand a significant amount of lateral pressure, right? And it's not just pressure from the soil, because when you build a house, those block walls are going to be able to handle the weight of the soil wanting to fall into the basement. But what it can't handle is the additional weight that's caused by water. So you've got the wet soil, you have expansive clays that are going to expand when it gets wet, and you also have wet soil that's going to freeze from frost in the winter, right? So these additional pressures are what causes the wall to get pushed in and bowed in. And typically, because it's always caused by water, it's going to be, when you see a horizontal crack, ones that are particularly bad, you're typically going to see water issues in the basement, right? So I want to just kind of superficially address how you would repair the block wall to keep them from moving, and then also, what's the most common type of waterproofing repair that you're going to see. Now, just from a show of hands, have all of you seen any basements where you have a long horizontal crack and the wall is going in? Yeah, so it's pretty common. So when we look at that, when we're called out to inspect that, what we want to do is we want to measure the crack, and then if possible determine why it's cracking. And the why is always the same: water. But is there gutters? Does the grade slope back towards the house? Is there a settled driveway, patio, sidewalk that's funneling water back towards the house? So many times when you have a wet basement, a lot of the repairs can be done just by handling the runoff. Occasionally you will get a basement that just, the house is sitting on a high water table, and no matter what you do on the outside, water is coming up from underground, sumps run continuously, and they can still be waterproof, but the vast majority of basement issues are actually surface runoff. And like I said, so the weight of that soil is pushing in that wall, the wall is failing, and that's why you get that large horizontal crack. So now, there are variations of severity of these cracks, right? So there is an engineering principle. So before I say that, I'll tell you, I'm not a structural engineer, but I read a lot, right? So there's an engineering principle that says that the block wall is still stable until it's moved 1/3 off the center of its face, right? So if you can picture a block wall like this, right, it's perfectly vertical. This is the outside, inside, your load path is right down the center. So if you tip it in or pull it in, as long as that load path is still going down through the center of the block, it's still considered stable. So when I say if it's moved 1/3 off the center of its face, if you look at an 8-inch block wall, if that wall is moved in 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches, now here's your load path, and the wall is outside that load path, so now it's really unstable. So when you go into a house and you look at a wall and you're like, look at this crack. I mean, it could look pretty gnarly and pretty scary, but if you measure it, I mean, we still just use an old-fashioned plumb bob, right? It's very reliable, never going to run out of batteries. You could come in with a laser level, you could use all kinds of ways to measure it, but if you put a plumb bob on that wall, and let's say that wall's tipped in like 3/4 of an inch, maybe 1 inch, I really wouldn't get too excited about that, right? I would try to fix the root cause, which was water. I'd still go back outside and say, do I need gutters? Do I got to prove the grade? Do I have to lift the patio? Maybe I have to put in a waterproofing system. But you're not looking at a big foundation repair. You'd like to be able to say, it's still, yeah, it's tipped in, it doesn't look very pretty, but it's still pretty stable. So as you start getting in, as you start approaching 1.5 to 2 inches, most people that repair foundations that probably had 1.5 inches are going to say, we need to repair that. Even if technically you could get an engineer to say it's stable, a wall that's moved in that much is probably likely to continue moving, right? It didn't just move from perpendicular to bone in 1.5 inches or 2 inches overnight, right? That slowly marched in over 20, 30, 40 years, and it'll probably continue to do that unless you fix it. So that's the first key thing that I want you to think about when you're looking at houses. If you've got a complaint, if you're looking to buy an investment property, if you've got that wall that's bowed in, whether you want to hire someone to measure or you're just trying to, look at what's my worst case scenario, measure the wall, see how far it's bowed in. Under 1 inch, I would keep, no problem. I wouldn't even worry about it. You start getting more than 1 inch, maybe you should hire somebody else to take a look at it. So certainly when these walls are bowed in, there are repair options, right? So I've showed several of the repair options here. I think you can probably see that pretty good. So if you look up in the upper left-hand corner, those are pilasters, right? Have most of you seen steel pilasters installed on walls? It's fairly common. So what they're really doing is they're taking a steel beam. I've seen angle iron, channel iron, even like 2x6s built up, a couple width, and they're securing that to the floor and they're securing it to the ceiling of the basement. And what that does is that's going to help the wall resist any further movement. So typically when you have a big foundation repair, you want to fix the root cause and then make sure it doesn't get any worse. It's not practical to push the wall back where it was, right? Because in order to do that, the only way to push the wall back is to dig on the outside all the way down to the footing, right? And no one wants to do that, right? It'd be nice if you could do that, but landscaping, porches, sidewalks, driveways, patios, decks, gardens, everything is in the way. And we've already got a hole in the ground. We've already got an 8-foot hole that you could work with, right? So our goal is, as long as that wall is not in danger of imminent failure, let's raise the wall. So here's some different methods, right? In the upper right-hand or upper left-hand corner, you see the steel pilasters. In the upper right-hand corner, those are metal plates. How many people have seen those plates on the wall? Now, I just saw one two weeks ago, and it was a brand new repair. In the lower left, what you're looking at, that's what you see behind the wall, right? When you see that plate on the wall, what's really happening is they have driven the threaded rod maybe 8 to 10 feet out into the yard, and then they sink an 8 anchor and connect it to that. So now that wall can't move in anymore unless it can drag those anchors with it. So instead of it getting its support from a beam inside that's vertical, its support really is the anchors not being able to pull through the soil. And then in the lower right-hand corner, those are carbon fiber straps. They're not as common, but I see them several times a year, and they're kind of interesting because if you were to see those, you wouldn't think they would do anything, right? They're about 1/4 inch thick, they're probably about 4.5 inches wide, and they're just glued to the wall. But the way that they work is because this carbon fiber, it cannot stretch, right? So they epoxy it to the wall, and now the only way for that wall to continue to bow in is you would have to stretch or lengthen that strap, and that can't be done. I thought I heard a question, but anyway, so those are the common ways to fix it. So like I said, we have an hour-long class on this, and I'm just trying to give you some highlights on what you might see in a house. If you see it, it might help you understand what you're looking at to know whether something was a quality repair or something was shoddy that you should walk away from. So if you see the carbon fiber strap, that's actually a good repair. It's just not common. The anchors, the pilasters, that's what you're looking at. So of course, when you have this wall bowed in, like I said, you're almost always going to have some water, right? Because the root cause was the water. So what I'm trying to show you here is an example of what people call a B-dry water system. B-dry is just like saying Kleenex instead of facial tissue, right? It's a national company. Everybody knows it at that, but there's lots of companies that put in these type of waterproofing systems. And they're really very effective. So upper left-hand corner, that's what you're likely to see if you just walk into a basement. You can see where along the floor, the cement was broken out every place, and then you'll see like a little plastic panel up on the wall, right? And that's the waterproofing system. But if you really didn't know what caused that, I've tried to give you this little diagram right here. So here's your typical concrete block wall. You've got water in the soil that wants to come through the block wall, and sometimes it can come through, you know, you see it all the way up to the frost line. Sometimes like 2 or 3, 4 feet high. Other times just at the base of the floor. So when you have a system like this, what they've done is they've broken out the floor to add some drain tile to collect the water, and then they'll put in the sump pump, which one doesn't exist, so they can pump that water away. And then the plastic that you see coming up on the wall, they'll drill some holes in the block, because what you want to do is any water that's pounding against the wall, filling the block, you want to get that out of that block wall as fast as you can, so it can't build up that additional pressure. It can't be there in the winter when it freezes. So that's what we're doing. We're just trying to control the flow. So we're collecting the water that's in the block, letting it come through the block, behind the plastic, and then down into the drain tile. And so those, usually when you see those installed, most times you'll see a 20-year, sometimes you'll see a lifetime warranty. They're really very effective. I mean, we went across thousands in the 30 years that we've done that, and very rarely do we see them failing. So they're pretty reliable systems. Now, of course, it's all, like I said with the foundation, it would always be better to fix it from the outside if you can, right? But it's just not practical. The expense is too great because you have to dig, so they always like to try to fix it from the basement. Same with a poured foundation when you have a vertical shrinkage crack, right? You're going to repair that if it's leaking water. Your best bet, just epoxy it from the basement because you're already down there. Okay, so if you have a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and I'll entertain the question when we do it. So, because if people are interested in something and want me to slow down, I'd be more than willing to talk about that. Okay, so like I said, we're going to try to touch on a whole bunch of stuff superficially and hopefully you'll get some value out of it. So, some common problems. Well, the first thing is sewer scope. So I know there's do you do sewer scopes too, or you just did a drain cleaning?
So I'm glad you addressed me because if you guys want to see real life pictures of everything he just described to you on the basement waterproofing, I got real life pictures about everything he just did. The only thing I haven't done is those fiber straps that he was talking about, but I'm really interested in seeing how those work. I actually cut the floor just like he was describing. We drill holes in the block, lead the block. I also use the RFP board for what you were calling the B-dry system.
Yes.
It's phenomenal. If you're doing flip houses, if you've got rental houses, you just want a dry basement. You don't want to repeatedly paint those walls in the basement. The RFP board, you never have to paint it. If you get mold or anything like that, it's fully washable. And yeah, we do sewer scopes, we do hydrojets, we do everything. That's discount drain cleaning. We do your water cleaning. Everything he just described to you, I think he was working for me for a second. Okay? He was a better spokesman for me than I was for myself. But he was 100% dead, accurate, everything he said. And I do every system that he just described to you. You want to see real-time pictures, I got them on my phone. I do about 50, 60 basements a year.
Thank you. So the next thing we're going to just touch on sewer scopes a little bit. That's why I brought that up. So you probably know what a sewer scope, right? A sewer scope is a fiber optic camera that you would put in your sewer line to inspect that sewer lateral that goes from the house out to the city sewer. So here's some examples of some of the things that we found, right? And this is something where we have done lots and lots of inspections for investors. When we find that a lot of times the more experienced that an investor is, they already kind of know what to look out for, so sometimes they tend to get away from having a home inspector. But there's still things that you as an investor, even if you're buying your 60th house, really can't do yourself, so that's why you could come to someone like us to help you, right? Because you just don't know what's the condition of that sewer line between the house and the street. And believe it or not, that is your responsibility. That's whoever owns the house, right? If you've got damaged pipes, if you've got problems, it's not the city or the county that comes out and replaces that sewer line. That's the cost that's borne by the homeowner. So really, in our experience, and from talking to a rotor guy, like probably the minimum of any type of repair underground like that is probably just under $5,000. And we've heard stories where people have paid up to and just over $20,000, right? Because a lot of that has to do with if your sewer line it could be anywhere from the bottom of the basement, so 8 feet to 16 feet deep, right? And if your front yard is 40, 60, 100 feet to the road, that's just an unbelievable amount of digging. So this is where we can help you out. And so here's some examples. This is a drain line that was actually fairly clean. You're just starting to get some tree roots through there, right? So if we saw something like that, we would say, okay, it looks pretty good. You better keep your eye on that. Maybe have it hydrogenated just to be careful. This picture over here, you can see this is your drain line. So this is only about 1/4 of that line is open. So if you're looking at a house that's for sale, or you're looking at a vacant house and like you run all of the water, that pipe is still going to drain fine, right? Because all you're doing is draining water down there, right? But as soon as you get a tenant in there and they start flushing other stuff down the toilet, it's not going through that, and you wouldn't have known it, right? So in this case with tree roots, I mean, sometimes you can't see the pipe very good because the roots are in the way. Sometimes you can't get the sewer scope past the roots if it's a big enough blockage. So you don't know the condition of the pipe. So at the very least, you have to have it cleaned out, and then you would have to have it re-scoped. This one here, this is a good example. This is a house that we did that was only 20 years old. And this is a big offset, right? Here's the one pipe, and here's the other pipe. It was offset so far that the majority of the water I'm saying that nicely, the majority of the sewer that was leaving the house was leaving it, getting right out of the house and then going right into the soil around the house. So this was in flushing. I think it was like 24 years old, and it was basically from sediment. It had been like that for a while. When they built the house, the backfill up against the foundation that ended up settling busted that pipe, and it was like that for a long time. And that was $4,500 to fix it, and that was because it was just in one spot, right? They knew right where it was at because they dug down. So like our sewer scopes, and I'm sure most sewer scopes are like this, we have a counter on that, so we know exactly how far it is, right? So sometimes okay, it's showing me that I took one right turn and I'm out 45 feet. I'll go out there and base it, like, okay, this is right underneath the maple. So sometimes we can identify that. And here's another example. That's an old clay drain tile. I mean, almost everything that you're going to see in older areas of Flint and Genesee County still going to have clay tile going out to the road. But some of it's cast iron, and cast iron in the house, cast iron in the basement. As soon as you start getting out into the yard, it's clay tile. And there's an example of one that just over time is just deteriorating, it's broken. And when you see a thing like that, when you're looking at a house, you probably wouldn't find it because the drains are going to drain great. Well, there are so many offsets, broken sections that it's going to start collecting debris, and very quickly you're going to have a problem on your hands. And something like this, you can just dig up and replace the fitting. Something like that is just going to require, replacement of the pipes. There's multiple ways to replace it. I know we don't want to get into a lot of it. Sometimes they dig it up and replace it all. Sometimes there's a system called pipe bursting where they can dig, every 20 feet and pull a new pipe through that and burst it along. There's a cured-in-place system. So there's multiple ways to fix it. That's just a picture of those are the two sewer scopes that we have. And so they're pretty expensive pieces of equipment, but they're very nice. We can get you a color video of the entire underground line so you can see the condition. This is the next thing I wanted to talk about. So this is also something, if you're looking at houses, this is something that is going to cost you money, but it's easily identifiable to you. This is a Federal Pacific scab lock panel. So have any of you run across these or had problems with it?
Had one today.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. So I mean, we see these probably at least once a month. I didn't have the other stuff. So here's the key negative factors, right? So basically, the U.S. Product Safety Commission says that about 1 in 25 breakers is just not going to trip off in an overcurrent situation. So something is overheating, somebody may be being shocked, the breakers are just going to fail. So the U.S. Product Safety Commission says these panels need to be replaced if you run across it. And so if you hire a home inspector, anybody, electrician that comes in to do work, if they see this, that's the answer. And they're pretty identifiable to you, right? Because they all are going to say, I can't read it right here, but right, it's got this distinctive red tab. The breakers are tipped in red. That's the only panel that looks like that. But it says Federal Pacific Stamp Lock. And you can Google that tonight because I think you'll find it very interesting. It's STAB-LOK. That's how they spell stamp lock. So if you're looking at buying a house, if you've got a tenant complaining about electric problems and you walk downstairs and you see that stamp lock, just know that's going to have to be replaced, right? And it's still reasonable. What's it cost to get an electric panel upgraded, right? Anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. There's a pretty wide range there, but so it's not the end of the world. But if you're looking at a house, you know, every $1,500 if you have to spend is $1,500 out of your profit that you'd like not to deal with if you can push that onto somebody else, like the seller, of course. All right, so that's that. Aluminum wiring. So we have a lot of aluminum wiring in Genesee County. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So aluminum wiring was used primarily between the mid-60s and the mid-70s. And the U.S. Product Safety Commission says that a house with aluminum wiring is 55 times more likely to have a fire than a house with copper wiring. And once this was discovered, that's why starting in roughly about 75, they stopped using aluminum wire on 120 volt circuits. Now, we still use aluminum wiring every day on new construction for the service coming in from the meter and for your 240 volt circuits, like going to your washer, I mean not your washer, but your stove, your air conditioner, hot water heaters, things like that, but dryers, but you can't use them on the 120 volt circuits. And the problem with aluminum wiring is that they're very volatile. It's a soft metal. They don't resist being installed. They don't resist being bent very well. It's easy to damage them and crack them. But the biggest problem is because the aluminum is soft, they tend to expand and contract when they get warm. So you have problems at the connections like light switches and outlets, light fixtures, things like that. And believe it or not, you probably, I shouldn't say believe it or not, because you're all smart, you probably know it. If you go and you buy just an outlet at Home Depot, some of them are rated for copper, some of them are rated for, it'll say CO/AL for copper and aluminum. So if you go and you want to change all your outlets to make them look nice and loose, and you buy the cheapest 47-cent outlet you can get, it's not going to be rated for aluminum wire. So if you happen to have bought a house with aluminum wire, and this is what happens, people update their outlets and their fixtures, and you know they want a new light switch, and all of a sudden the whole house has got fixtures that aren't conducive with the wiring that's in there. So the wire gets warm, it expands and contracts, it works its way loose at the screw fittings, and once it's loose, then you get some arcing, and the arcing will create some corrosion. The corrosion creates resistance, and then pretty soon you have a fire condition. So this is something that would be very difficult for you to find on your own unless you were willing to take off the panel, right? So home inspectors do that every day. Yes?
So why is it still use 220?
There's two reasons. Is that the metallurgical blend of the aluminum is more stable and different than what they used in that. But the secondary reason, which is almost the primary reason, is because you just have two connections, right? So if I'm going to wire a dryer outlet and the wire going 80 feet across the basement, if you go look at the price difference, it's astronomical between aluminum and copper. So the code says that the aluminum is still safe in that period because there's only two connections. One in the breaker, one in the outlet at the dryer. So we can control that. We can make sure those two, that the breaker is rated for aluminum, the outlet is rated for aluminum. We can use the antioxidant paste to clamp those down. So that is a lubricant to get the right torque on the screw and helps resist corrosion. So if you think of the old houses, when I talk about your 120 volt circuit, you got the breaker, then you got one outlet, next outlet, the light switch, the fitting. in that same 80 feet of space I'm talking about for a dryer, now you might have 20 different connections, many of them hidden in the wall. So it's really all about, you know, cost and reducing risk. So
No, that helps a lot.
So, okay, we kind of talked about that. So there are some repair options, right? I don't want to get into all the detail, but I'll just talk about these two. So there are 4 main methods to repair aluminum wiring. The one on the bottom is what we see the most. So it's not practical to rewire a house. In the National Electrical Code and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, neither one of them recommends or says you should rewire the house with aluminum wiring. What they say is you need to have somebody sit at every one of these fixtures, pull out every outlet switch, everything, and inspect the connection. And what they want to do is they want to take a short copper pigtail, connect it to that aluminum wire, and then use that pigtail to connect to your switch outlet or fixture, right? So in the upper right-hand corner, that's really the best method out there because each wire is in its own slot. It has a screw. There's actually a torque rating. Electricians have screwdrivers that are similar to a torque wrench. You can adjust it so you can know exactly how many foot-pounds of pressure you put on that screw. So you know you've got a good stable connection. They're more labor intensive and you don't see them very often. That purple ideal wire nut at the bottom, that's an acceptable method and that's what we look like. So if you were going to hire an electrician, typically what he's going to do is at each connection use that ideal connector because that's approved by the NEC and the CPC for that. So if you open up a panel and you see that, if you're doing some work in a house, you discover it's got aluminum, that you're taking out outlets and you see that purple connector, those little short pigtails coming off of it, somebody repaired it for aluminum wiring, and that was a good repair. So the last house that we saw where an electrician went through and updated all of these pigtails, it was a house in Grand Blanc, and I think they charged them, I think about $1,800. So that's what they were looking at. So that is a far cry from the cost to rewire a house. And like I said, the code is not requiring you to rewire a house, but this is what they're recommending that you do. Okay. Asbestos, we're going to talk a little bit about, I know I'm probably running out of time. Everybody knows what asbestos is, so we're not going to get into all the detail. We'll just talk about these are the 6 most common types of asbestos that we're going to see in houses in Genesee County, right? This one right here, this is the one that I would be the most worried about. You go into a house that had an old boiler, and you've got this old asbestos wrap on the pipes, and it's always friable. You see chunks of it hanging down. That's in really rough condition, and that probably is going to need some professional remediation, and I would really figure that out into your cost. Probably the most common one we always see are these old 9x9 vinyl and asbestos floor tiles. So I know everybody has seen those. You've seen the little shuffleboard patterns in the basement, and the vast majority of those contain asbestos. And for the most part, they're perfectly safe. So if you look at that picture that I put up there, I would tell somebody, yeah, that most likely contains asbestos, but I wouldn't worry about it. It's perfectly safe like that. Where you end up having problems is when you see that people have scraped them off the floor. And by the way, that black mastic that's oozing down, most of that mastic had asbestos in it as well. So when people want to scrape up those old tiles, they're really just releasing the asbestos fibers. The next time that you see where they can be problematic is going back to the wet basements, right? So you go into a house in Flint, the middle of the floor looks like it's brand new, even though it was done in the 40s, but you walk around the perimeter of the basement, and you can hear it. The tiles will be popping when you walk on it, and you'll see some of the mastic oozing up from the joints, right? Those tiles are deteriorating from the water, and that's when you're getting the asbestos release. The biggest problem is when you can step on them and you can hear them tap on the floor. So that's considered an impact surface. And we're not going to talk about this today, but this is the same thing when you worry about lead paint in old houses, right? Lead paint on your door frame is not an issue. Lead paint on a wood double hung window that is rubbing up and down where you're constantly scraping the paint and you're releasing dust, that becomes the issue. So asbestos is very similar. If it's all encased in that nice vinyl product, not a big deal. Once it starts to deteriorate, it's a big deal. The heat tape, right? So many of you have probably seen this, right? You'll see this paper tape around heat ducts in the basement. That paper tape is just a pure asbestos product. it didn't come with an adhesive, it was like wallpaper. You would just, wet it in a bucket of water, wrap it around the pipe, and it would dry, and then it would just stick there, and that's what they used to seal heat ducts with. Now, in that picture, again, that's actually in very good condition. I wouldn't worry about that, but they're not usually in that condition. You can see where people have tried to peel them off. Some of the asbestos is hanging. So if you have that in a house that you own, really the best thing you could do is probably gently spray that down with water, so when you're messing with it, you're not releasing any fibers, and just encapsulate it. Encapsulation can be as simple as foil duct tape, duct tape, painting it, right? Those are all valid encapsulation methods, just to try to seal in that asbestos. Down here in this lower thing, asbestos cement siding, right? We could drive around all day and point that out. That's the same with this transite pipe, right? So what that is just pure Portland cement with asbestos fibers mixed in, and the fibers were like an aggregate. They were like a binding agent. The fiber held the cement together, much like you would put mesh or rebar in your driveway or something like that when you poured it. The fibers held it together. Well, that siding, we would not make a big deal about it, but you'd want to know about it. But you shouldn't be scraping it or grinding it or sanding it to paint it like that. You might power wash it and put a good coat of paint underneath it, but it's pretty stable. Most people probably aren't going to get too excited about it. Then the last one that I wanted to talk about was this, very common vermiculite insulation. Probably most of you know about vermiculite. Back when the Flint Journal was really a big paper, they would run an article like almost every January about vermiculite, and it would scare all kinds of people in Flint, and then we would get tons of calls, and we'd go out there and look at it. But most of the vermiculite contains asbestos, but it didn't contain it naturally, right? You can still buy vermiculite today. You could go into any garden store and buy that, it's vermiculite, and they mix it in with potting soil, because vermiculite will absorb water and then kind of hold the water and then release it back into the soil. It has a lot of great properties, and in its own right, it didn't have asbestos, but almost like 90% of the nation's supply of vermiculite came from these mines in Libby, Montana, and 50 miles away were the same mines where they were mining asbestos, and it was the same company. So they cross-contaminated in their storage bins and their equipment, their packaging equipment. They would put it in paper bags and sell it to the store. So it's possible that you could get into a house and test it for asbestos and it had none. I believe that if you said you did it, I would believe you. But the vast majority was cross-contaminated. But the EPA's opinion on that is you would probably do more harm than good by trying to remove it from your house. So don't do it, right? They're saying if it's in the attic, you probably want to hire somebody. I wouldn't blow cellular or something that wouldn't disturb it, but you might hire a company to carefully roll fiberglass over it. So same thing, you're basically encapsulating, right? You're putting a layer of something between you and the vermiculite or the asbestos so people don't disturb it and release asbestos in the air. Mold, just talk a little bit about mold. I don't want to get into all like the health benefits and what mold is and stuff like that, but we can just get into. Ed, how much do you want me to wrap it up? I'm probably past my half hour. Do you want me to?
Yeah, when you can.
Okay, yeah. What's that? Gary says skip the mold.
I did get the hook off sometimes.
Okay, so we'll just talk quickly, a little bit about, we do a lot of commercial buildings, right? So we've done, I was telling Ed earlier, we've done 3 funeral homes, I've done more than a half dozen churches, I've done a couple hotels, countless dentist offices, doctor's offices, retail stores, party stores, stuff like that. So besides the home inspections, we also do commercial inspections. We treat them pretty much the same as a house, because most inspectors that do commercial inspections aren't going to inspect the actual equipment that's in the building, right? So if you have a restaurant, I will inspect it, but I'm looking at like the structure of the building, the roof, the electrical, the heating and cooling, the plumbing systems, right? I'm not looking at your fryers and your walk-in equipment and stuff like that. So just in case you didn't know, this is really probably the last thing to talk about is the difference between commercial and residential home inspections. Residential home inspections are typically done to a standard that was established by ASHI. ASHI is the American Society of Home Inspectors. There's another pretty good group called INTERNACHI, and their standards are almost identical. But those standards typically only apply to units that are up to like a 4-unit apartment building. Once you get into something bigger than that. Ideally, you would go to a second set of standards, which is the ASTM E218-1. I don't know if any of you have heard about that before in your commercial standards. That is a standard that it's a lot more intensive than what you would think of as a home inspection. Because part of what they want you to do is gather all of the maintenance record, hire individual contractors to come in and evaluate the rooftop package units, elevators, escalators, all kinds of things like that. So you don't see that done unless you're talking about a substantial commercial project where you really are going to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for this assessment to try to figure out what you had. So, basically, contractually wise, any standard to inspect a commercial building is fine as long as the inspector and the customer wanting the inspection agrees to it, right? So we tend to focus on just those main things, like you said, and that would apply to anything, right? Any commercial building either has a wood frame wall or a concrete block wall, right? They got a wood frame roof or they got trusses. It's all very, very similar, just a larger scale. And so Ed's up there with the hook. So, one more thing, because it's going to make it harder to get me off the stage. Like I said, we've got 12 classes. So I've touched a little bit on the classes that we offer. So all the classes we offer are basically an hour long. So we would have gone into a lot more detail. So we're always willing to come back and talk more. Carrie's going to put a stack of our business cards on the back. And are we done? Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, Mark. The last announcement is the meetup Thursday, June 24th. She does have Catholic Charities and G-Card coming to help explain why some of you landlords are not getting your money from them. And that's going to be an actual in-person meetup. It's not going to be a Zoom meetup like the last one, and that's going to be at Brick Street. So that's Thursday, June 24th. It is in the newsletter at 6:30 p.m. It's going to be at Brick Street. Yep. They closed on Mondays permanently, so. Hopefully they bring their checkbook. But thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Linda, or any of the board members. Thanks.